So let's get started on Tu Bishvat. Hopefully everyone is having a wonderful Tu Bishvat on this cold winter day, but maybe eating some fruits. Sort of with that in mind, that's the custom that we have some kind of a Tu Bishvat Seder and eat fruits, especially fruits from Eretz Yisrael. What I wanted to do is sort of go all the way back to and look into some of these aspects of fruits, eating fruits, making a bracha on fruits, that sort of thing. So all the way back to Gan Eden is where we'll start. And the pasuk there says, "Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al Adam lemor mikol eitz hagan achot tochel." You can eat, from all the different fruits in Gan Eden. And the Meshech Chochma says, "Mikol eitz hagan achol tochel perushu mitzvah lachayos nafsho lahenos mipri hagan." So sometimes you'll see it translated as "you may eat from all the fruits." The Meshech Chochma, tells us no. It's a tzivoy. Vayitzav Hashem. Hashem commanded Adam Rishon, you have to, you should eat from all the fruits in Gan Eden. In order, on the one hand, obviously it's to sustain yourself, but on the other hand, it's to enjoy the fruit. Ukamad Amar, so if Yerushalmi to Kedushin, right? There's a famous Gemara in the Yerushalmi that says, Asid Adam litain din v'cheshbon, that at the end of days, we're going to be called up in front of the heavenly court to give our, reckoning on why we had the ability or, we had the opportunity to eat from all these different things, v'lo achel, and we didn't partake. So there is this idea of a tzivoy, of a mitzvah, to eat everything, obviously, that's permissible to eat, and to enjoy that which we have the opportunity to enjoy. So Amar Adam leishto. Now he goes, sort of takes us to the next level now. And if Adam Rishon had told his wife Chava, Ki Hashem Yisbarach tziva le'echol min hagan, that if he had explained this, told this over to Chava, that hey, we have this mitzvah from Hashem Yisbarach that we should be eating all the fruits. Afshalo kivna lemitzvah, even if she didn't have the intention of eating for the sake of the mitzvah, mikol makom hayakiyuma magin shelo lechem eitzadas. Just the fact that she knew there was a mitzvah, by doing so, that would have protected her from eating from the eitzadas. So this idea of this protection based on a mitzvah. Although Kevin Shalo Amar Allah b'mitzvah Hashem Yisbarach, but he didn't le'achol v'lo kima ha-mitzvah, and therefore he didn't tell her, so therefore she wasn't makayim the mitzvah. Now the mitzvah exists, regardless, but she had to know about it in order to be makayim the mitzvah. How do we know this? He says, "Ukadivri hara'ah," as the Sefer Chinuch says, "Bi'ochel matzah," regarding achilas matzah, which is a mitzvah, at least on Leil Seder it is. V'savar shehu chol. And what happens if you eat on Leil Seder, eat matzah, but you are thinking it's Sunday, it's Monday, it's an average Tuesday? Lo yatza, that doesn't count. You have to know that where you are, what you're doing, and that what you're doing is a mitzvah. Ukamashalo zachra chava, and so too by Chava hatzivu. The only thing she knew is that there was a lo sase, right? She knew that Hashem told them you can't eat from the Eitzadas. So that much she knew. She knew there was a lo sase. So lachen lo higin avra halo sase. So not doing a lo sase apparently doesn't have protection on it, but apparently, if you are mekayim a mitzvah of a mitzvah, so say a positive commandment, that has a protection on it, which she didn't have because Adam Rishon didn't share that information with her. So that's the Meshech Chochma. Again, sort of enlightening us to this idea that a mitzvah has this ability, a positive mitzvah has this ability to protect us. So where else do we see this idea of protection? So one area is there's a medrash, famous medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, that quotes the pasuk by David Melech that says, "Hukam all," that he was elevated, that David Melech was elevated. And this is Keneged Mea Brachos. The word all to elevate, is Ayin Lamed, which is 70 and 30 in Gematria, which is 100. So that's Keneged Mea Brachos. What does that mean? He elevated, the David HaMelech elevated with these 100 brachos. Shebechol Yom Hayu Mesim Yisrael Mea Anashim. Every day at this period of time, every day 100 Jews were dying. Ba David Vesikin Lahem Mea Brachos. And that's why David HaMelech came and said, you know what, we need to be saying 100 brachos every day. Kevin Shetiknim, once he did that, Nisatzra HaMagefa. The Magefa ended. Just as a side note, I've heard from leaders like the Minchas Asher that during this pandemic, this is one of the things we should be doing, is saying Mea Brachos every day for the same reason, because we saw by David HaMelech that it actually stops the Magefa. But again, this idea of this protection by making brachos, we have this protection afforded to us. And, so maybe taking this to the next step, the Kadakemach. So we saw this before, Rabbeinu Bachya, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, when we looked at the Rabbeinu Bachya in his essay on brachos, on bracha, and he talks about, at that point we looked at the top portion of the essay where he gives us the idea that the word baruch in the bracha is the idea of a brecha, right? It's a source of water. It's the infinite source, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. He is the infinite source for all of us. But then later on in the same essay, Rabbeinu Bachya says, Umi pneisha kol adam chayiv levorech mea brachos, asapram bekan. So this is actually, and it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch that we're supposed to say mea brachos every day. So it's not just a good idea, but it's actually brought down in Shulchan Aruch, codified that way. And the kind of Kemach, sort of latches onto that idea and says, let's go through some of them. Not all of them are about eating. Some of them are, the brachos we make in the morning, brachas of Torah, brachas of Shachar, right? All of those, and all the brachos that we have in davening and the Shemona Esrei and etc. But certainly when we're eating the 3 meals a day that we're eating and snacks or whatever else, those also get included in the 100 brachos. So he says, Techila Shemona brachos she's chayav adam levarich al hashulchan, and he starts there with the 8 brachos that you'd make for a meal. Lefisha yesh k'tzas b'nei adam noagin kula yisera beberchas hashulchan lefisha hu makom seuda, because he says, there's sometimes we get so caught up in the meal that we don't pay enough attention to the brachos that we should be making. And we should be paying more attention to that. And he gives us a bit of an idea here that what should we be doing? What should our approach be to these brachos? He says, first we have to think about in our minds, like, who are we blessing? Like, what is this bracha all about? And then we actually make the bracha. And he says, "V'chein hizkir David HaMelech alav hashalom." And this is, he interprets a pasuk that we say 3 times a day: "Aramimcha Elokai HaMelech va'avorcha shimcha le'olam voed," that I will put on high Hashem, the King, and I will bless your name forever and ever. So he says, "Bira kasav." What is that pasuk telling us? So he says, "Aramimcha," I will, put on high, b'machshavat chila, it'll raise up in me this idea, this thought, first, v'achakach avorcha shimcha, then I will make the bracha. And I'll, in other words, I'll understand, I'll think about what it is that I'm doing, sort of taking a step back and just pausing and saying, okay, what's the right order to do things before I eat? To make the bracha first. Who am I making the bracha to? Make the bracha and then eat. Be'elohim hashmona. That's his sort of introduction. Then he says, okay, what are the 8 brachos that we make on, on the meal at the shulchan? He says, netilas yadayim, that's 1. Hamotzi, 2. Arba shal berchas hamazon. Then we have 4. Once when you're benching, you have 4 brachos. What are they? Those are the shlosha min Torah. The first 3 of benching are min Torah, revius drabanan, and then the 4th bracha is drabanan. Okay. So that is 6. V'yahayayin lefanav ula'acharav. And then, so certainly we're talking about, this is going to be Shabbos and Yontif, where beforehand you would be making it on yayin, making kiddush, ule'acharav, and by benching, you could also bench alakos, right? So there's your 8. וצריך אדם להזכריש על שולחנו בסעודתו בשמונה ברכות אלו, ושיזבונין בהם כדי שיהיה שולחנו asher lifnei Hashem. This is how we sort of elevate our table and make it a holy place. And I think this is where he's sort of touching on this idea of how brachos can protect us. Because he says when we're eating and drinking, right, when we have this table full of food, it sort of leads us, even if we're not aware of it, it sort of leads us to this place where we kind of feel like, hey, I've got everything I need. You know, there's a bit of arrogance there, that I've got everything. I'm not starving, thank God, right? It's all there. But then you might forget, where is it actually coming from? And then he gives us a couple psukim and he goes on from there. But the idea that how is it protecting us? It's protecting us because it keeps our mind sort of in line with what's really going on. Like how does the world work? And how does it that we're able to get the food from the stores? How do we have the money to pay for the food that we get from the stores? But it all comes from the whole supply chain is really Kadosh Baruch Hu, and it's in his hands, right? So that's an idea of how we can be protected by making these brachos, by a mitzvah saseh of making a bracha before we eat. So at this point, I'm just going to skip down to the Me'or V'Shemesh, because this is I saw this. Rabbi Warsh actually mentioned this or went through this, and I saw that, and I thought, this is amazing. We have to bring it in and go through this here. So we're going to jump back to Gan Eden now, okay? And this is from Parshas Bo, so last week's Parsha. And the pasuk over there says, V'kacha tochlu. So this is talking about Korban Pesach and the mitzvah of Korban Pesach as it's brought down in Parshas Bo. So it says, V'kacha tochlu also. How do we eat a Korban Pesach? Masnechem chagurim. I'm not sure how, like maybe it was a tunic that they wore, something like that is sort of tied around. Na'alechem be'raglechem, you have your shoes on. Umekalchem b'yedchem, in your stick, your staff is in your hand. V'achatem oso b'chipazon, and you have to eat it b'chipazon, with a sense of urgency, right, hurting through it. V'haya hayom hazeh lachem lezikaron shivas yamim, etc. Okay, so the Me'or V'Shemesh says, Roy lasum le b'tam mitzvah zu. Madua tihiyeh achilasa b'derech chipazon davka. So the Me'or V'Shemesh is specifically, sort of focused in on why are we eating Korban Pesach b'chipazon specifically? Like, why is that part of the mitzvah? So he says, "Halo achilasa Pesach hayisa kodem chatzos." Right? We know the halacha by Korban Pesach. It has to be eaten by chatzos, which is why when it comes to the afikomen, we have to eat the afikomen right before chatzos, right? Because the afikomen for us is keneged the Korban Pesach, or in place of. So it had to be eaten before chatzos. V'lo yatsu mipesach beisam ad haboker. And we know that during Pesach Mitzrayim, they didn't actually get hurried out of their houses until daybreak. So they were already way past eating their Korban Pesach that year. So why do we have this mitzvah of eating a Korban Pesach b'chipazon? So it says, Od nizbonin b'masha amar bal haggadah matzah zu she'anu ochlim al shum ma. Right? This is famous words from the Haggadah. This matzah that we eat, why do we eat it? Shelo hispik beitzim, shelo hispik. Because they're
it's from lachmitz.
Right, exactly. Their dough didn't have time to rise, right? Shene'amar v'chulei v'gam tzeda los asu lahem, and then it says they also didn't have these provisions, right? Again, this is a quote from the Psukim. So v'adayin tam zed tzarich bir amnam yesh lefaresh al pi masha amarnu lamala. So I think what he's bothered by here is, why didn't they have provisions? They knew, right? Coming up, you think about it, coming up to Makas Bechoros, they know it's coming, right? I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu was told by Kadosh Baruch Hu, there's only one more Makkah and then you're leaving. So I'm sure Moshe Rabbeinu is not keeping that to himself. He lets Bnei Yisrael know you're leaving, pretty soon. Why wouldn't they have provisions? So he says, Yesh lefarish al pi masha amarnu lamala al pasuk mikol eitz hagan acho tochal. He's going to connect this back to Gan Eden, to the eitz to mikol eitz hagan acho tochal. You can eat from anything in the Gan. So he says, "Mi eitz hadas tovara lo soch," but by the eitz hadas that you can't eat. V'rabosenu nechlaku b'zeh me'eza eitz acho arbarishon. Now there's a famous machlokas as to what exactly was the eitz hadas, right? What did he eat? V'yishlishon me'ayin yada adam harishon. But he says before we even get to that, you could ask a question: how does Adam Harishon even know eza eitz hu eitz hadas tovara? How does he know which of these trees is the eitz hadas? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you can eat from all the different trees in the garden except it's hadas tovara, how does he know which one of that is? In Lo Sheneh Amar Hashem Yisborach Hareu Lo. I mean, if you're not going to tell me, he points to one and says that's the one, right? But the problem is we don't see anything like that in the psukim, that he's actually sort of pointing to it and saying that's the one you cannot eat from. He seems to be saying it more generically, or generally. So he says, Ach yesh lomar she'ikar tzivoy haya leval yismashich achar ta'avaso lechol hamaycho mifashehu orav lechayech v'nechmad lamare. He says, really, I think what's going on is that the tzivoy is that you shouldn't be just sort of grabbing a fruit off the tree only because it looks beautiful and you think it's going to taste wonderful, right? Really, when we eat, we should have in mind that we're trying to give our body sustenance. That's really, at the end of the day, why we eat, right? And if you look at it that way, it's very practical in its nature. And the more beautiful one or the less beautiful one, at least in our own minds, shouldn't come into play. Rather, we're just focused on what it is that my body needs at this moment in order so that I can, continue doing what I need to do. And that is the avoda of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'zehu maimer akasav mikol eitz hagan achot tochad. That's what it says. From all the trees you can eat, perush shemuter ato le'achol mekulam. You can eat from all of them. Rak shelo yihiyeh hevda be'inecha le'achol mizeh mitzad shetisavelo machmashu arav lechayech lekotz bezulaso. As long as your mind, you can eat from any of them, as long as in your mind, you're not only going after the ones that you think are the most beautiful or the ones that are most appealing, and as opposed to the other fruits that maybe you're not as interested in. So Valti Arv Kamohu Hahevdel Hazeh Ne'asar Lecha V'zehu Ume'etz Hadas Tovera Lo Tochel. And that's what it means that you are usher from the eitz hadas, because that's where you're sort of saying you're saying eitz hadas tovera is the idea of not a specific tree, but a specific mindset that you have in your eating. Rotzelomar shelo tavchim b'achilasecha le'achol mizeh mipnei shehu tov tam l'kutz be'acher asher hu be'inecha ra v'nochol lomar shelo haya ha'etz hadas eitz prati. It wasn't a specific tree. Rak al kulam b'shave nitztave leval yevaker ben tov lara. You shouldn't be going to any one of them and sort of saying this one's good, this one's bad. Really, all of them should be equal in your eye. It should simply be about what it is that you need at that moment because you're hungry. Mitzvah hataiva. V'razal in the Chachamim. And so the machlokas of which fruit he actually ate is really a question of which one did he have this taiva to eat. And for this reason that he ate without or because of this taiva, and not because he was simply trying to pragmatically, eat what he needs for sustenance. That's why our forefathers descended down into Egypt, Mitzrayim, in order to sort of purify that nature of being very physical, and to break that taiva. And how does that work? Because they become slaves, and that sort of breaks the shibud, the servitude, breaks that taiva. And that's how the chet of Adam Rishon is fixed, by us going down to Mitzrayim. And so now he's bringing this back. So the idea is really the problem in Gan Eden by Adam Rishon wasn't that there was a specific tree of Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. It was a problem of how Adam Rishon and Chava apparently were approaching the idea of the trees and what they were allowed to eat and what they weren't allowed to eat, based on sort of this pure taiva mindset. And therefore, when we come on Pesach, and what's our mitzvah on Pesach? Is lechem b'Pesach lechem oni. We call it lechem oni. Shehu tofa b'li melech u'b'li shum tikun lekavona hazos. That's why when we have achilas matzah, the mitzvah of achilas matzah Pesach night, you can't dip the matzah into, there's not so many choices anyway, but, you can't douse it in, I don't know, parv butter, or assuming that you're having fleishiks that night, or real butter if you're not, or, right, or, covering it with anything else. You don't. You eat it just plain. It has no flavor. It has no nothing. It's just matzah. And that's laharos shelo yimshach adam achar ta'anugos b'nei adam. And that's sort of what teaches us, or it's supposed to instruct us, that, not to go after just this, the pleasure of it itself. That's what we call it lechamoni, because a poor person doesn't generally have the opportunity, doesn't have the ability to make a choice and say, no, I'm not interested in eating that. I'm only going to eat this other thing that I'm interested in. They generally only have it's whatever's in front of you. Umuchroch le'acho min haba biyado. Afavoter orev lechayicho kin gam anachnu ochli matzah mi'isa bilte misukonim. That's why we also are putting ourselves into that place where we're only eating it with nothing else that sort of makes the matzah more palatable. Sheyeshava lanu hamatok ve'eninu metok rak lekiyum nechshenu lavodaso. Yisbarach Shemo. V'nidash atzmeinu ayidei achilas matzah shivas yamim leneged shivim shona yemei shnosenu. And another interesting concept, and keep in mind, this is he was the Meor V'Shemesh was a great Hasidic leader, Hasidic Rebbe in his day. So this is certainly an union of Hasidus. But he says that there's 7 days of Pesach. Each one of those becomes sort of keneged 10 years of your life, assuming that, the average person lives until 70. This becomes, each day of Pesach is keneged 10 years to sort of focus in on what, is really our what should be our goal in life, what is our task in life. And another interesting So now he's going back. Why didn't they make provisions? We have to learn from this from our forefathers, that they didn't want to go after their own taivas. Like they were doing things the proper way in Pesach Mitzrayim, so they didn't. So lahachin lahem tzeda misukenes v'areva rak achlu b'tzesim ugos matzos below tikkun. They could have prepared all kinds of things, but they didn't. They purposely didn't. Why not? Because they realized that the takana of the Avera of Adam Rishon would be only to eat the matzah without anything else, and not anything else that's going to sort of give you more pleasure and be more flavorful. So so this is really what we should be thinking about. And maybe it does give us a bit more of an insight as we sort of connect this back, over to Pesach, is what is that? We all sort of think about Pesach and really, most people aren't really looking forward to eating the matzah on Leil Seder, right? It's and for the full 7 or 8 days of Pesach as well. But this is sort of giving us an idea as to why we're doing that. It's actually by design. That's the idea, according to the Bishemish, is it is by design, that it is helping us to sort of get our heads screwed on straight, so that when we think about food and when we think about what our purpose is, so sort of taking this back up to the top, making sure that we're saying the brachos beforehand, that we have our mind in the right place, that we're thanking God, we're showing our gratitude and, for where things come from. And that it's not always about just what tastes the best, but it's also really about the sustenance that our bodies need. And that's really the mitzvah. So with that, if you haven't had your Tu B'Shvat Seder yet, something to think about.